Welcome back, artists. I'm Wyatt Paints. This week, I'm saying forget the algorithm, I'm doing a personal project. And it doesn't get more personal than a Halloween costume. And this year, I'm paying tribute to an actor that's popped up in a laundry list of movies all throughout my childhood. Rick Moranis. Spaceballs, Ghostbusters, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, they're all classics. But I decided to go even further back and printed up an Audrey 2 from Little Shop of Horrors. Heck, you might even want to make one for yourself, which is extra easy because the STL for this one is available for free. You can find the link down below. And finally, since there's no sponsor this week, it'd be extra awesome of all of you if you like the video to like it or say something down in the comments to let me know that it's okay for me to do these fun projects every now and again. Because at the very least, it's a nice little palette cleanser. With all that said, meet me over at the painting table. I'm gonna grab my brushes. Let's get started. So unlike usual, I don't have a base to start with, because really the only thing to paint is the pot itself. Now, you may notice that compared to the native files, my Audrey 2 is much smaller. I'm planning on walking around with this, so a 3-foot wide man-eating plant would be difficult to manage. But scaled down to 25%, it should do just fine. And with the reduced scale, I can replace all the wood support with printed ones. I think rescaling did interfere with some of the fits, but it's nothing that can't be compensated for. One of the first things to do is line up and glue all of the puppetry supports. I ended up printing the supports in PLA, but with the weight of the pod, the whole thing ended up a bit floppy. If I were to do this again, I'd most likely drop the infill of the pod down to 5% or less and maybe up the walls to 3 to lower the overall weight and reduce the top heaviness of the prop. But you live and learn. In the meantime, I need to fully assemble and glue up the 2 halves so I can address the seams that are inevitable with this type of print. And I took care of those seams with a bit of Tamiya putty to fill in the gap and a touch of IPA to smooth it down. The only thing to watch out for here is keeping the slots for the teeth clear. And after everything dried, a quick prime with some filler primer can help knock down any of the telltale layer lines that you normally get with FDM prints. While I could use putty for that, it would add a lot of weight to an already top-heavy project. After it was primed up, I could still see the seam on the bottom half due to a slight misalignment, but it's gonna be on the underside, so no biggie. It looks good enough to go. First up, Demonic Yellow. Now normally, I tend to paint from the darker colors to the lighter ones to take advantage of the surface texture to make some natural shadows. But in this case, inky shadows are not the plan. I'm going for a more bright and eye-catching flora tones. So I'm approaching this like I'm painting an outrageously bright cabbage. You might notice I didn't even bother basing the back quarter of this. This is because the greens here are going to be so intense that none of the yellow is going to survive. Moving up to the first green with wild green, I'm applying this with a heavy dry brush so I can feather it out over the yellow. And I'm not really concerning myself with getting super smooth transitions. In fact, I actually wanted a bit cattywampus to mimic a natural look. Whenever I'm trying to copy nature, being a bit off kilter with it leans towards a more random and less controlled appearance, which is key when I want something that seems like it was grown and not just painted. I kept pushing my greens with green skin, and this was just like the previous, but I'm moving back the heaviest areas towards the base of the pod, while lightening up my touch to only catch the raised veins across the lighter green and yellow. But you should know, this is very much a feel process, so a lot of the time when doing something like this, it takes a lot of back and forth, doing, undoing, and redoing areas until I like it. And then down the road, I might change my mind and just redo it again. That's just how it goes sometimes when you're trying to copy Mother Nature. For the final green, I gave everything a super light dry brush of angel green. Really, I'm only trying to add a bit of definition to all the veins, so I try to keep it as reserved as I could. After I got this down, I varnished everything in matte to save my work. And it's looking pretty good. Time to look at that inside. While I did extend the yellow inside the mouth, most of this is going to be covered up. The more important task is to block out where my darker colors are going to be with a bit of black. This is not entirely necessary, but it'll help prevent any bright spots from popping up later. So I just slapped it down and moved on to some actual color with Terrestrial Titan. I'm going to use this color as my anchor point and the darkest area of my plant. This starts with this deep purple, then transitions to the red for the lips, followed by yellow on the outer flesh, and finally deep greens of a more mature plant structure by the bud. With that said, the next obvious step is bringing in crimson to conceal that purple-yellow boundary. I followed that up with Resplendent Red in a light dry brush to brighten up all the details. For me, this is when it really started to look like Audrey and not just a head of lettuce, which makes it a very good point to varnish and keep everything safe. While the pod dries, I moved on to the leafy tongue, and since I want this to fit in but still stand in contrast with the rest of the mouth, I started with an all-over base of Terrestrial Titan to get it nice and purple. Then, to add a bit more color to the mix, Gothic Blue got layered on top to push those purples to the background, giving me a pseudo vaporwave look. Next, I grabbed some magenta to wash the entire tongue, but it's super important to catch any pooling. If they're left there, they can do some really funky stuff. Thing is, I ended up liking the look so much that I gave the same treatment to the insides of both the pods, just to normalize and blend the flesh to a more homogeneous look. A quick set in the mouth for a little reassurance that I'm on the right track was enough confirmation for me to press forward. But it could use a little bit more detail, so I went back to the Gothic Blue and carefully picked out all the veins to give it a little bit more readability in the mouth. And since I did the tongue veins, I felt it was a good time to go on the outside and lay down some scarab green to give the larger main veins an upfront seat to the show. To me, adding these in makes it a bit more menacing and not as delicate with just the lighter ones. The final major detail to handle are the teeth. Fresh from being primed, I based the bottom of each tooth in crimson to fit with the existing tones of the mouth, after which I glued them in place, as these are way too fiddly to try to paint when they're not anchored down to something. With all the choppers secure, Dirty Bone was a quick and easy way to start getting them nice and toothy. All that's needed is to follow the gum line and you should end up with a nice angular tooth, similar to a shark. I followed this up with a few passes of soft tone wash, and I really want to gunk up these teeth, so it's going to be better if I use 2 or 3 coats than just dump on one thick one. So just remember that, because when you put it on thick, it'll never really do what you want it to. After a few minutes, the wash was dry, so I pushed back the shade with a few touches of Dirty Bone, then Skeletal Bone, and finally Ancient Stone to get all their bitey bits perfectly dangerous looking. At this point, the painting is done. And while I usually do all the assembly off camera, I think there are some important steps I should show to finish this one off. To get going, I picked up this plastic flower pot for about $1 and a couple of flower arrangement foam inserts. We can put them aside for now, they'll be important later. First, the arms need to be secured in place, but unfortunately the screws that I got were a little bit too short to put a nut on it, so I just had to crazy glue them in place. Since I have no plans of dismantling it, it's gonna be fine. I just needed to be careful not to glue any of the parts that I need to move. Once I had in the base roughly in the center, the foam blocks got wedged in on either side to ensure it stayed upright. Now it's time to add some foliage. This is some fake ivy decorations that I ordered from Amazon for about $6. It came with 12 strands that are about 7 feet long, which is way too long to be walking around with, so I chopped them down to about 2-foot sections, making sure to leave long stems at one end. Then I took those long stems and drove them into the foam. So long as you get 4 or 5 centimeters of penetration, it should have a strong enough grip to hold the rest of the vine. So then all it takes is to evenly distribute the vines around the circumference. Just be careful not to get them tangled with each other or the puppet mechanism. Once the vines were in, I secured the pod to the top of the puppetry. Then it was just a matter of gluing down some individual leaves to act as a budding crown around the pod and hide the puppet handle in the back. After that, I called it done. And Phoebe, Seymour, this came out great. And yeah, the puppet can puppet. I can't wait to be running around messing with this on Halloween. And yeah, after all the parties, this will be hanging out my shelf for years to come. But what about you all? Is this something you want to give a try? If that's so, you're in luck, because remember, the STL for this is free if you use the link down below. And if you do tackle Audrey too, I'd love to see your take on one of the most charismatic man-eating plants ever put to film. As for me, I only had so much time to sneak this one in. Hopefully I can sneak in another personal project when I do the Spaceballs part of my costume. But if that's gonna happen, well, this will have to be goodbye. But as always, thanks for watching, stay creative, and always enjoy the process.